I mean, as I'm sitting here, and this is the part where we kind of have our mosh pit of the minds, at least this portion, and we'll bring everybody together tomorrow. But one of the questions or themes that's striking me is this notion of the role of faith, perhaps, in our public discourse, given particularly with politics, economic scenarios and situations, and so forth. And I kind of want to make it relevant for our discussion. I'm wondering, is it from the perspective of those who have positions of power and are the decision makers, is this a scenario where we have flow gone wild, right? Where the opportunity to quote unquote practice that space where you are your best is somehow at the expense of others. And I'm particularly fascinated in commentary for both you, Derrick, and Meg, about ways we can combat that. Because I know we've talked about the outcomes, but I'm interested in sort of examining what are the causes of the situations that we're in right now. Is it a mongering of power, greed, what have you? I'll
go with that.
Yeah. Well, I put that out just because, from one perspective, I can remember being involved in a play called A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry. I don't know if you know this play or not. It's a great play that's set in Chicago, 1950s. And the director I was working with chose to use Frank Sinatra's sort of My Way as the way of contextualizing entering that play, dealing with the poverty and the challenges that this African-American family was experiencing moving into Chicago and eventually a white neighborhood. So for me, I'm wondering, how does that relate to dynamics of flow? How does that relate to when we think about the challenges that we're experiencing with our education system, and then the challenges that we have personally in terms of letting go or stepping into that river, as you described, to let go of the shore? Comments?
What was the word you used? At first, I thought you said faith, the role of faith.
Yes, faith. Yes, faith. Not fate, but faith.
Faith.
Faith. Oh, like destiny.
Not fate, but faith is in a belief system, an investment in a particular outcome.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I thought about that a while ago. There is a 4th century Christian philosopher called Saint Anselm, who coined this little saying, which has been repeated over and over. And in Latin it says, credo ut intelligam, non intelligo ut credam, which means that I have to believe in order to understand. I don't have to understand in order to believe. That was, and I thought this was the epitome of kind of Christian mysticism. But then I realized that there is a lot to it. I realized it with my grad students who may come in all knowing so much and not being able to do anything because they don't really believe that there is a meaning or a unity in the world, in the universe. And so they piddle around for a while doing not very interesting things, and then they go off and they never really go very far. So in that sense, I think there is faith is necessary to believe that it's worth trying to understand. Because if you don't believe that there is some kind of order, some kind of a meaning in the universe, why bother trying to understand? You might as well watch TV, right? And so I think that would be my off-the-cuff response about faith.
So one of our modern-day scientists, Umberto Maturana, who's a wonderful cognitive scientist, said that we do not describe the world we see. We see the world we are able to describe. And this goes for me back to the lack of science education, that or faith-based education, where we're only looking for certain kinds of data to confirm what we already believe. So I think one of the things that's so depressing about our current lack of dialogue and polarization is that we use now, whatever side you're on, you use whatever you see on television or what somebody says, you use it to confirm your position. So you're only seeing the world through this very small lens that just gets smaller and smaller. And yet, in contrast to the kind of learning environments that you were describing, Derrick, this is, the curiosity to realize there's another way to see. There's other possible interpretations. I just find that that's the major loss in our public discourse these days.
So one of the things that that inspires me about this issue of faith and science goes back again to Galileo, in that, in some ways, Galileo for me is a hero in that Galileo truly loved the Catholic Church. He truly loved the Catholic Church. His desire to ask the governance of the church to change the scripture was so that the Catholic Church would avoid a mistake. He knew what the situation was. He had seen what it was. And in his deep love for the church, he wanted this to be corrected so that the church could be right. He didn't want the church to be seen in a bad light going forward. So he had this ability to have this sort of dual vision, which I really think is a fantastic thing. He had the objectivity of science that he worked with, and in his development, in a sense, of the precursor of the idea of what we think of as the scientific method, to sort of lead him through his investigation of scientific principles. But at the same time, his faith worked just fine for him, and so there's no conflict for him going back and forth. So he had an open mind, and of course asked others to have this open mind also. But I think he also encouraged this idea that at the time you could have an open mind, or it was okay to have an open mind about these issues. And so I think that, the faith that I have in, as Mihaly puts it, that the universe does have some kind of organization and some kind of structure, pulls me along in my investigation of this. But at the same time, the science works really well for me in this sort of over and over confirmation of what's seen and what's observed and how it works. But I still have the belief on the other end that even if the data right now doesn't show that this is the case, I'm okay with that because at some point it may. But I can still see that separation, and I think that open-mindedness is incredibly important.
Great. Another question I'd like to pose to you all, and we have some thoughts, so if you are able to comment via the channel, and we've got ideas that are being fed to me via the iPad, we'll try our best to incorporate them. But this notion of what it means to be the world power in America. I remember shortly after, I think it was February, where there was a commercial, and it was featuring Chinese students in the classroom and Chinese professor, and it's subtitled. And they basically show the fall of great empires, great leaders in history, the Greek civilization, Roman civilization, now the US. And it was a very biased commercial in the sense that it sort of pitted what are generically American values, ways of living and thinking, against China as though they are a great enemy. And you made a comment earlier, Derrick, that this notion of having the US sort of remain at the forefront of what it means to be technologically advanced and savvy and being that world leader. Is there room for other civilizations, other cultures, countries to step in and
you get the big question.
and have a piece of that pie as well?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm only just kidding.
Next question.
No, I have to be really careful. I sometimes feel like I have to preface something like that I've said with a whole lot of other stuff that goes around it, and there is a whole bunch of.
And I know it's a loaded question, so
No, that's
like,
okay. That's fine. It is yes, but that's okay because see, part of my description of this is, I have to say, it's one way of looking at how the world is structured. That's one thing, and if you looking at the current world structure puts you into a framework that makes you think of, for lack of a better term, who's in the lead, who's on top, who's the strongest. This is now how we play this game in the world, on the big stages. Who's the strongest? Who's got the power? Who's got the money? And it's a big power game. Well, if we didn't have that structure to work with, there are many, many, many other ways to play this, and I feel like we really need to get away from that because it doesn't help us as humanity on this planet. I don't think we're put here to fight with each other and figure out which country is the strongest and who's got the most military might or economic might in the sense of, who's on top of the other. In the world, there is room for everyone who's here. Every culture has a right to be who they are, and to manifest who they are, and to share who they are with everybody else, because when you come right down to it, all of us working together, sharing what we all have, makes the best product overall for all of us here. But the present construct that we have says we need to be in this position to protect ourselves from this, and this. And frankly, I struggle with how to sort of say something like, we need to maintain our technological capability so that we can remain in a superior position. I have to struggle with that against what I feel on the humanistic side of that we shouldn't be dealing with that at all. We should all be working together for the benefit of the planet and all of us who are here. So it's a real struggle to say that. But the reality, in my eyes, is that we do need this. Because on the one hand, if we're playing on this playground with this bunch of aggressive kids, then what are we going to do to protect ourselves? Not necessarily be aggressive back, but what are we going to do just to protect ourselves from the other aggressive kids who may not see the world in the same way that we do, have different values that could be very sort of damaging to us. So I don't really know how to balance all of this stuff out. It's a very difficult, it is a loaded question. It's a difficult one to deal with. It's very hard for me to sort of resolve in my mind of, but you can, hopefully you can see where I am, in this sort of difficulty of making these things work together.
I want us to have more public conversations that express the difficulty and complexity and paradox of these things. Yeah. That's what we're missing. I mean, I just read in Newsweek, they did a survey, I don't know who did it, of what Republicans want. And the first thing was they want to put America first. I was pretty stunned at that, actually.
Can I ask why? What?
Well, I'm tying it to criticism I've heard from some of my friends that the one thing they can't, there are many things they don't like about Obama, but the one thing they feel fiercely about is that he doesn't put America first, that he has apologized for our behavior, and he's reached out to people with just this ecumenical approach that, we're on one planet. It would be nice if we acted like one species, and every culture has something to offer. So I put those two things together, and I also would put it together with this undercurrent. We started talking about power dynamics. It's come up here and there in our conversations that we've been having. At a time when people feel they're losing power, they become more fundamentalist. They grasp on. When uncertainty increases, you could do a nice little graph of this. When uncertainty increases, people cling more and more to the shore. And the prophecy said they will be torn apart and suffer greatly. But that is what's happening in the world right now. Every election, if you look at, because it just came out with Portugal yesterday, every election these days is a movement to the right. to people, to leaders who promise that they know a way out of our predicament and out of these complex messes. And instead of just acknowledging, you know, this is new territory, it's very complex, it's very paradoxical, we're lost, we just follow. This is what history has been filled with, stories of following dictators who promise us a better life, and we're willing to exchange our security. It was Benjamin Franklin who said, you know, that people who exchange their liberty for security end up neither secure nor free. But I think that is the stage on which we're trying to do our work these days.
Yeah. Right. Well, for me, that is sort of the inverse when we try to think of ways to understanding flow, Mihaly. I'm wondering, is there an inverse of that coin? And I'm wondering, perhaps, is that privilege that is taken to the extreme? Do you have thoughts on that?
Could you rephrase the question more? I'm in between hearing aids, and sometimes I don't.
Oh, that's fine. So my question to you was, when we think of the other side of flow, the theory that you present to us as a way of understanding happiness and meaning in our lives, and I get that as an artist, someone who can be passionately committed to the task at hand. But then I'm wondering, in this context, this cultural and social and political context that we're talking now, is the inverse or the other side of that coin of flow privilege that has gone to an extreme?
Yeah, well, I just came back 2 weeks ago from Eastern Europe. And I haven't been back for a long time. And the issue that is so obvious there is the enormous change in the culture and society of how much more lively, how much more excited, how much more hopeful people are now than they had been for 50 years under the Soviet rule. And people tell me that, you know, it was impossible to have flow before, either at work or even in the media or in schools, because there was too much emphasis on keeping people from taking any initiative, autonomy, and pursuing their interests and so forth. So I see the other side of this problem. The notion of freedom is one that is exhilarating, almost inebriating. People feel, wow, now we can actually plan, we can start a business, we can go abroad, we can think in new ways. And so, if you look at it historically, flow is, as on a national scale or a cultural scale, flow is fairly rare. You know, I mean, you find it times in history where one of my favorite periods is the early Roman Republic. You know, where every citizen had to take on offices, but only for 6 months. You know, for 6 months you were responsible for the garbage disposal in the city, and the next 6 months you would be a priest, and so forth. And that kind of rotation of skills and the freedom to find your niche within a community where you could actually change and have an impact. That is one. I mean, there are many periods in history for a short period where flow is almost woven into the everyday life, and then there are long periods where it's not, where people feel oppressed, and the only way to survive is to work from 6 in the morning to 7 at night, like at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. I mean, we made big progress in the last 200 years in the way we lived, in the way we freed people from the oppressive nature of survival. now we have other problems, and I think the problems you bring up are genuine. Partly the notion of security and how to keep what we have, and the other one is greed, which is to get more of what we have. Mm-hmm. And when you put those two together, you can end up in very, very uncomfortable political and social situations, I think.
Great. Question for all of you, and taking this directly from the feed here. What is our personal responsibility to commit to flow, work for improved science education, and live a life that does good? Yeah?
Check, check, check.
Right? But what's the responsibility? Do we have a responsibility?
Who else is going to do it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're sort of taking advantage of it, so I think part of what's owed back is that we create an environment where it's available to everyone to have that, to have those opportunities. Mm-hmm. And it just seems to me that that's part of what we give back, is making it possible for that to happen, for those things to happen for everybody. Do we have a responsibility for those things?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we do. Mm-hmm. I think we do. And to me, I think it's important that we, not only do we have a responsibility, but that we cultivate that, because we're trying to generate, I feel like we're trying to generate an environment, a society, a culture where the appreciation for these things is not only, shared and is available for everyone, but that we sort of reinforce that it can continue to be by standing up for it and strengthening it and encouraging it everywhere. I think that's also part of our responsibility to do that. And also to see that everybody else everywhere has these same opportunities. It's not just restricted to the wealthy industrialized nations, but that it's extended to everybody.
And that part of the reason why you do the work you do with children, the emphasis on children as opposed to going in space perhaps, or maybe, I don't know, where, if you had a choice.
So my first choice always is to go into space.
Yeah.
Always. But for me, the thing is that the potential that I see every day. I mean, as educators, you all understand this, but the potential that I see every day has to be cultivated and has to be developed, because this is the resource, the students are the resource that are going to improve the quality of life for everyone on the planet. And I suppose what you'll hear in my rhetoric all the time is this interest in improving the quality of life for everyone and finding every opportunity to bring those resources forward. And that's what I see in children for that. But the science part of that, I think, I tend to want to develop that in kids because their curiosity is still so fresh and new and still so impressionable and still can be, encouraged to stay open with regard to science without saying that, well, I can't understand it, so I'm not going to deal with it, I'll leave it to someone else, and then we end up with governments where 62, and you said 62 of the incoming 80 don't believe in global warming.
Right.
This is a real issue for this planet. This is talking about the well-being and, for everyone on the planet. We can't afford to have that. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, that's great. Yes.
Well, I think one of the basic responsibilities, I think, on a small scale, that we all could take more seriously is to love what you're doing, to learn to love what you're doing. And if we had more of that, I think a lot of these problems would begin to be less pressing, like wanting more material things, wanting more power, because we would be getting our rewards not from those power and material things, but from a job that we love to do and that we believe in. And that could be anything from one of the guys I liked very much, before he passed away, was John Gardner, who was the first Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare under Kennedy. And he coined this famous phrase, which he said, a civilized nation is one where a good plumber is held in as high esteem as a good poet. And I think somehow we are very far from that notion. And that's why, talking about children, we did a national study of high school students, several thousand students, and one of the questions was, what do you expect to do after you finish school? And we didn't have any plumbers, any electricians, anyone below rock star and doctor. 11% wanted to be physician, expected to be physicians, about 10% lawyers, and the rest were sports stars and entertainment. We don't realize how much happy you can be being a good plumber or a good electrician, because in the homes of these kids, the posters in their bedroom are all of people with guitars or with basketballs or things of that sort. There is no engineer. I mean, you were saying that we don't have engineers. There's no poster of famous engineers. There's no, our culture is biased in a direction which makes it very difficult for a young kid to want to be an engineer, or let alone a plumber.
Right.
So here's something I'd love to do. Excuse me for jumping in here. Here's something I'd love to do. I remember when the space shuttle program first began, there were these really gorgeous posters that NASA made. And these posters were posters of space shuttle just after launch. Not quite cleared the launch tower, but this beautiful image of this rocket going up with the flame and the smoke. And on the side, it said, "Going to work in space." And I thought, hot damn, that's what I want to do. Go to work in space, right? And so it was very encouraging to me. But here's the experiment I'd like to try to do, and Mihaly directly hit on this. There's no poster of an engineer, but there's a poster of a sports image, there's a poster of a musician, all those sorts of things. What I'd like to do as an experiment in this country is, for maybe 5 years, I'd like to shift the focus of the news programs and all these other sort of media-related outlets that glorify people in athletics and engineering, entertainment. I don't want to take their jobs away, but I just want to de-emphasize their presence in the media. And I'd like to elevate the presence in the media of all of the other possibilities of vocation that people could have in a positive way. It's great to be a plumber. Do you know the great work that where would we be without plumbers? Oh, really? Where would we be without plumbers? There's nothing wrong with that. So I'd like to run this experiment to see how kids respond to it, because we all know that what kids say, what they want to do when they grow up, to a great extent, are all the typical things that we always hear about, and that's because this is what they see. I know that in some of the neighborhoods where I grew up, kids want to be involved in the drug trade because it's lucrative, because of the role models they see in the neighborhood. In some neighborhoods, not every neighborhood, but in some neighborhoods, who's the person with the greatest amount of resources? Who's the person with the greatest amount of power? Who's the person that is making things move and shake in the neighborhood? That's who I want to be like. Oh, well, it's in the drug business, but that's not it. That's what I want to be like. No, let's shift away from what we typically see and change it so, just for 5 years, just to see what kids would then describe they might want to pursue for a vocation if we had these different models available for them, as prominent as the sports and entertainment figures are now.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. We are at time, and I realize I try to find ways to incorporate feedback from the audience. Hopefully, Kathy's going to be a little better than I was. We were wanting to take questions from the audience, but I think we follow the flow, if you will, of the conversation, so we hope it's beneficial to you. We're going to take a 15-minute break right now, so feel free to stretch your legs, maybe go out and get some sun, get some water, potty break, but we'll be back in about 15 minutes. Thank you.